So the emotional journey of doing anything great is basically, and if you think of a U, and the bottom of the U is called the swamp of despair. The top end of one side of the U is you're saying, man, this is awesome. This idea that I've got is awesome. And then it's, oh shit, this is a little bit harder than I thought. Oh my God, what are we doing? And then you're in the swamp where you're like, that's it. I'm dead. I'm not coming out. I've destroyed myself. And then you claw your way out, and which is hard. And that's where, they talk about humor, the gallows humor, the conviction, the emotional support. You talk about Michelle, there was a ton of that. And you get out. And the issue is, once you get out, the first reaction is, oh, okay, hey, we got out. That's great. Let's stop. But you keep going. You say, no, we still haven't gotten to the North Star. And you keep going. And if you complete that journey, what happens is you look back and you go, my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever done.
Today's episode sponsor is Aditon, creators of Aditon Operations Kit, the military's go-to software for personnel and equipment accountability. AOK goes where you do, any network, anytime, any place. I got to know Aditon's co-founders, James and JJ, several years ago. They are former Army NCOs who have years of experience in the tech industry. They understand that most military jobs aren't performed behind a computer desk. Personnel and operations are distributed, but accountability of property is paramount to making mission. That's where Logi, AOK's equipment management software, comes into play. Formerly known as 92X, Logi is a next generation of equipment management for the military. Logi offers unrivaled features for military teams on the go. Ingest and digitize your primary and sub-hand receipts. Generate and share sub-hand receipts and DA forms with your team in just a few clicks. Capture photos, tags, and notes across your team to build context on the state of equipment. Get easy on-the-go access to critical property records. Logi is custom built for the modern military professional. It gives you your valuable time back so you can get back to the mission at hand at home or in the field. Whether you're doing monthly inventories or preparing for deployment, Logi is your pocket property book, giving you real-time visibility into equipment status and mission readiness. Logi is currently in use across the U.S. Army Special Forces, and it's expanding. For a limited time, listeners of the From the Green Notebook podcast can try out Logi for free. Visit aditonppc.com/FTGN-Logi to get started. That's aditonppc.com/FTGN-LOGE. How do I know what I think until I see what I say?
The Green Notebook, carried by military leaders around the world. Within those pages are sweat, tears, triumphs, and the hard-won lessons of life. Lessons worth sharing. Each week, the team dives into the notebooks of military leaders, business professionals, authors, athletes and coaches, and entertainers to share lessons and help you lead with the best version of yourself.
Welcome to another episode of From the Green Notebook. I'm your host, Joe Byerly, and today we're diving into the Green Notebook of George Barrios, former co-president of WWE, co-founder and co-CEO of ISOS Capital Management, and the author of Sometimes Wrong, But Never in Doubt. George's story is one of reinvention, curiosity, and doing the work. He grew up as the son of Cuban immigrants, nearly failed out of high school, and followed a career path that took him through multiple industries before eventually helping transform the WWE into a global media and entertainment company. In this conversation, George and I talk about the experiences that shaped him, why confidence should come from preparation rather than bravado, and why leaders must understand a system before they try to change it. We also dive into the emotional journey behind building anything meaningful, the value of reading widely, and what it takes to keep going, even when the vision is clear, but the outcome is not. And this was also just a really fun interview with a guy whose people would follow him into a burning building. However, George's problem is that he keeps finding buildings to run into. Trust me, that line will make sense once you listen to this episode. But through it all, George makes the case for doing enough work to have conviction while remaining humble enough to know you may still be wrong. So grab your green notebooks and please welcome to the show, George Barrios.
Hey, it's great to be here, Joe. Thanks for having me.
I originally picked up your book because I grew up as a fan of WWE. I remember my mom would go to the local cable company before a major pay-per-view. She would go pay a box. All my friends would throw in like $5-10, and then we would watch it, like when I was like fourth or fifth grade. Moved away from wrestling for a while and then found my way back to it again in the last couple of years. Actually,
welcome back, Joe. That's awesome.
Actually, I was stationed in Europe, and it's very hard when you live abroad to watch live sporting events. And it's for some reason, like watching football games after the fact is really hard to do. It's just not as enjoyable because how the game turns out. So we would actually end up watching WWE pay-per-view events on the same model that you and Michelle built.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's great to hear.
decade, which we'll get into.
Yeah, that's awesome. So look, it reminds me too. I started watching wrestling. My parents came from Cuba in '59, and so I would watch with my abuelo, my grandfather, me, my cousin Jorge, and me would sit there, and that was a daily TV ritual. So yeah, we share that. Although I'm a lot older than you, so it was way before pay-per-view when I was watching. We were watching on a 19-inch screen TV. So
yeah, you're watching back in the territory.
Yeah, well, it was like it was Vince was just starting, right? He was just consolidating. It would have been in the mid-late 70s, so he was already there. He was the announcer, and as when I joined the company, and he and I talked about the old days. That was the period when he was thinking about it, kind of strategizing on what he wanted to do.
Yeah, well, one of the things that there's a line in the book that like is my favorite. And actually I wrote it down in my green notebook. You said life's a movie, not a photo. And so I want to go like all the way back to the beginning of your movie. Because I think if you would have taken snapshots of you at different periods, we probably wouldn't even be having this conversation based on the photo.
Yeah, look, I mean, I use that line. I remember with Michelle, when we first left WWE before Vince said, "Hey, I need you guys to come back," and he fired us. And at that point, we had been there 12 years. We were ready to leave. Again, I tell the whole story in the book, but look, you get pissed off when it happens, right? Even though you kind of you knew where it was headed. And I remember saying that to her. I was like, "Hey, look, Michelle, this was a great movie. May not have had the perfect ending, although we rewrote the ending, which is unique, but you can't judge it by the photo. Yeah, you can't do that because that makes life tough if that's the way you look at it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there were a lot of times through my life, a lot of times self-inflicted, that if you would have just said, "Hey, this is the photo, this is who George is," you'd say, "Well, yeah, that's not good." But life is a movie, so.
Yeah, and speaking of like the two characters early on, your mom and dad, I think their story alone is amazing in itself.
Oh my God. So they're in Cuba. My dad had grown up very poor, sustenance farmer kind of community. He self-made man, went to work at a shoe factory, and then worked his way to the foreman of the factory, and then joined the National Union, which would have been like the Teamsters, and rose to the number 2 guy. He was the outward facing guy, incredibly charismatic guy. My mom, more middle class, had become a college professor, which you think back in the late 40s, early 50s, for a woman to do that, not easy. So she had her PhD from the University of Havana. And so they met, like my mom likes to say, we came from our family had more money, but your dad, by the time I met him, because he had risen so much, he had 2 cars, chauffeur. So she goes, he cut quite the striking figure. But in any event, the revolution happens. My dad gets thrown in jail because he's part of the societal infrastructure, being part of the union. He gets lucky. His niece is dating. I don't think she was married yet to him. A guy who's part of the Castro engine, and that guy ends up testifying on my dad's behalf. My dad was kept naked in a room full of men, hundreds of men, and people being executed every night by pulled out of that pen and shot. So in any event, he gets out. My family gets out in the turmoil at that point before Castro had consolidated power. They were able to escape. Not everybody chose to do that. I always say part of kind of why the Cuban diaspora has been so successful in the U.S. is because I think the people who left shared that almost, entrepreneurial take charge of your own life, and even if you're, going into, they left with nothing. They showed up in this country with nothing. My mom went from a college professor to having to go to work at the local Woolworths in the jewelry section. Immediately went back to school, ended up getting her master's at NYU. My dad got an associate's degree and got a job at Doubleday Publishing because he was an IT manager in the days with the mainframes. He learned that trade, and he went to go work for a publisher because he was an autodidact, voracious reader. And so he could get free books, right? That was the big perk for him. I remember him always reading in English with his second language and taking notes, it was all nonfiction books. So unfortunately he died when I was 9, but yeah, that seeing that, like being your role models, to see these people who lose everything, and you don't really get it when you're 7, 8 years old, you get it later, but that lesson, to watch these, but never one complaint. I mean, if you talk about people who could have complained about their whole life turned upside down, leaving family, never one complaint. Everything, a lot of joy in the house. So yeah, it was, when I decided to write a book, I had a few different ideas. It didn't start as a memoir, but I'm so happy it ended up there because their stories are amazing, and I'm glad to at least I got to tell a little part of it. But that brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah, I know you said you lost your father at 9, and that really affected you. But like before you lost him, I mean, was he like reading with you? Was
Oh my God. I when I got to first grade, I could already add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And it's because my dad, being Cuban, is a huge baseball fan. Two stories. There's a baseball, and he was a huge boxing fan. So there's a little story on both. But I'd watch baseball with him, and they'd show the stats, the batting average, the ERA, and I still can remember ERA, him trying to explain that it was, if you gave up 2 runs in 3 innings, it's a 6-run ERA because the ERA is grossing that up to how many runs per 9 innings, right? That's the way the math works. And I couldn't get it. I was like, but I was 5. But it's only 2. How could it be 6? And little by little, he taught me long division and multiplication. So I show up at first grade. I already know how to read and already know how to do math. But that was him. He was, again, 8th grade education. But my mom always used to say, and she was a very proud woman, she said, you got your brains from your father. He taught him, he was an autodidact. We had about 400 books he had read since he got the job in the 12 years that he lived there. And again, in his second language. So that was one. The second lesson I learned, again, a boxer. I was 6 or 7 years old. We lived on the first floor. You could see inside our window from outside. And one day there's 4 kids, about my age, doing stuff outside, poking, pointing, laughing because they could see us. And my dad noticed, he goes, who are they? I was like, well, I don't know. And he opens the window and they're saying my name. He goes, yeah, you do, in Spanish. Well, what's going on? And I'm, like in essence, they were bullying me. And so my dad takes me by the hand. I get choked up, and we walk outside. He said, we have to go outside and deal with this. And, he basically acts as a referee, and, one at a time, I fight each of the kids for, a couple of minutes, maybe not even that, right? The round. And if the other kid ends up on top, he pulls him off. If I end up on top, he pulls me off. There's some bloody lips, a couple of bruises, but I go through all 4. Now, end up becoming fast friends with those 4 kids. And, somebody said, well, what lesson did you take from that? To fight? I've probably been in more fights than I should have. So I'm not the best lesson. But, there is one of my favorite sayings, Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan till you get punched in the face. There is a reality of dealing with a difficult situation, in this case, physical, learning what it's like to get punched in the mouth, tasting your own blood, that gives you a confidence to stand up for yourself. And, some people would argue, maybe you learned that lesson too well. I've been accused of maybe being a little bit more combative, not in a physical sense, but maybe intellectually. And so I think maybe that's more temperament than not. But the fact that he took the time to do that, and the lesson of, the whole thing was, the lesson was, if you walk away from a bully, you will just be bullied forever. And so it is better to deal with the issue now. And I think he was right. I mean, like I said, those kids and I became fast friends. But anyway, those memories, among a few others, my dad was amazing. And I still remember my mom saying, my mom was, tough, little woman, about 5 feet tall. My dad was about 6'1", but she was tough. My dad was gregarious, outgoing. My mom was quiet, stoic. And I still remember when we came in, I thought she was going to be mad at my dad because of what happened. And she said to me, Georgie, my name is George. She called me Georgie. Georgie, tu papá sabe lo que está haciendo. Your dad knows what he's doing. And so anyway, a great childhood.
Yeah. And it's funny. Like I remember high school for me, like I didn't really focus on grades. I was more interested in partying and working. And I remember like all of a sudden it's time to apply for colleges. And I'm, in my mind, I'm like, oh, I'll just apply to these like big major schools, which I didn't have the GPA or the SAT score to get into. But I remember my mom actually taking a brochure out of the trash can that I had thrown away because I was like, I don't want to go to this school. And she was like, maybe you should consider it. And it's a school I ended up actually getting into and going to. And, it completely changed my life. It was University of North Georgia, which is a senior military college, and led me into this like amazing 20-year career. And your mom saved your ass too, right?
Oh, completely. So I was a complete fuck up. I starting at around, I was like the smartest kid in the class around 11 or 12 years old. Then it was a combination of the girls and the beer and getting high, all that stuff. And that lasted for a few years throughout high school. So I came very close to flunking out of high school, unless, I remember the report card. It would be a string of C's and D's. My mom actually taught at the school. She had become a school teacher, and so taught at the school. So they wanted to get me through there. They weren't going to flunk me, but it would be like C's and D's, and then there'd be an A, because if I liked the teacher and the way he taught and had kind of respect for him, I'd engage, right? But everybody else, I was like, I don't think you even know what you're talking about. So I just stopped. Look, it was that arrogance. Lucky for me, I'm good at standardized tests, so, I was lucky. I aced the SATs, even though I took them, rolled in after a night out drinking. So it just rolled into the thing and, but in any event, I wasn't going to go to college, right? I was like, I don't want to do it. I'm having too much fun, girls, blah, blah, blah. What the hell do I want to go continue doing shit that I don't, that I'm not going to class barely in high school. Why am I going to do this? And my mom, at this point, my dad had died. It was single income. I didn't have a bedroom. I had a cot in the house, right? And she's like, look, I can't keep living like this. You're a man now. You're 18. So if you don't want to go to college, that's fine. But you can't live here. You got to go do, live your life. And so then I chose college. Now, the reason I chose it, a little bit further back in the story, I didn't apply anywhere. Unlike you, I didn't apply anywhere. My mom, we were living in Connecticut. Unbeknownst to me, she applies to the University of Connecticut. And I'm like, I remember when I got the acceptance, I'm like, well, where did that? And she's like, yo lo hice, I did it. And that's when that led into the conversation of like, when I'm like, well, I'm not going. She's like, all right, well, great. Go get your own place then, because you got to go. So I said, shit, I don't want to do that. Went to school, almost flunked out there. But, I always say that, my parents, incredibly important. The second one is I met my wife first day of her freshman year. It was my sophomore year. We've been, dating and then married. And so now 42 years that we've been together. Totally changed the trajectory for me. Met a bunch of friends at UConn. 8 guys, dated 8 girls in the same dorm, 4th floor, 3rd floor. Dated all through college and then got married. So that group that I talk about them, the McConaughey 16, the name of the dorm, that group is still friends today. So it was a second family, absolutely changed the trajectory of my life. And like you, if my mom wouldn't have done that, I don't know what I would have done.
So this wasn't in the book and I wasn't planning to ask it, but I'm going to ask it now. Like you have 2 daughters, right?
3.
Okay. So like me, like I was, I was a recovered degenerate and I ended up getting myself straight, and I've had a great career, but my son's 16 now. And like he's comparatively like an angel compared to me. But there's like certain things, like last night, he just got his license. He's not allowed to have more than 2 friends in the truck. And so he drove it like a mile away with 2 friends in it. And he was like, Dad, I just went to the store. It's not a big deal. It's only this. And so like I came down hard on him because I was like, hey, like if you're saying it's only, then that means like you're about to throw your license away, all this stuff away for a 1 mile trip. So like what's it if it's you're saying it's only, the next question you should be saying is like, how much is this worth? And like, and so anyways, I'm coming down hard on them. Do you find yourself trying to like play defense?
So, I'm a little bit further ahead than you. So my daughters are 26, and then I have 2 that will turn 22, twins that.
Oh, so you
22.
won. You're already.
Yeah, I was about to say, if you would have caught me about 6 or 7 years ago, I would have said the last person you should be asking for advice on parenting is me. But I shares a few. So look, I had, among the 3, I'm not naming names, one was super easy. The other 2 were a little bit more difficult. Again, not naming any names, but all in all, none of them approached, one of my big regrets is, what my mom, who I loved dearly, I made her life really tough. I in quite all honesty, I had things like what you just said, stuff like that, where then, I laugh hard, I cry hard, and then, I kind of flare up when I get frustrated. So I probably flared up too many times on them, on stuff that really wasn't that big a deal. But I feel your pain, brother, man. I feel your pain.
Well, I want to I want to keep going. Sorry, I'll go back to your book now.
Yeah. No, I love it.
Yeah. Like, I think what was interesting too, like, one of the things that got me was like in the first couple of pages, you talk about one of your performance evaluations, and it says, the people who work for George would follow him into a burning building. The problem is that George keeps running into burning buildings. And I was like, I love this. And so like what I found throughout the book is that you would take a problem and you would go all in on solving it, and it almost seemed like you would put more work in than other people were willing to do to, one, not only understand it, but 2, to actually solve the problem itself.
Yeah. It's, and I remember that review. That was a little later in my career. The title of the book comes from another review. Somebody earlier in my career, somebody had written, George is sometimes wrong, but never in doubt. And, from an early age, and I think some of this is just temperament, and it gets to the burning building thing, is I liked, like, the thing that gets me excited is big problems, and a problem could be, hey, I'm trying to enter a new market or develop a new product, or we need to change the way we're doing things because our customers aren't happy with us. Whatever the problem is, the bigger the problem and the harder it seems to solve, the more I'm attracted to it. That pulls me in. I think over time, what I learned the prism that I developed, kind of the mental model, is which problems to go after. And that's why when that whole thing about always going into burning buildings was good advice. I got that probably when I was in my 40s, and I said, you know what? She's right, or maybe late 30s. She's right. I need to think about this. I need to really go after the stuff, not just that's hard, but that really changes something, right? That and then that allows me to bring people with me. But ultimately, Joe, and you hit it, and I'll go back to the title of the book, that other thing, that sometimes wrong, but never in doubt. I didn't know it at the time. When I asked the guy who was giving me the review, he's like, hey, no, he goes, that's a compliment. It comes from another book. And in that book, it's a Harvard surgeon, and he had written that great surgeons were sometimes wrong, but never in doubt, because difficult surgeries are difficult. They are hard. And if it's performed by someone who has doubt, the chances of success drop dramatically. But the conviction, right, that sometimes wrong, but never in doubt, doesn't come from bravado. it comes from having done the work. In the case of a surgeon, the study, right? That I probably got that when I was 28 or 29. I got promoted in that interview, first general management job coming out of it. But what he was telling me, he's like, you spend so much time thinking through what you should be tackling and then how to tackle it. To me, thinking through is writing, right? I write a lot. And then I come out of it and I go, now I get it. It also helps you bring people along, because that conviction, when people know that it's authentic, that it's coming from, I always say leadership is the rhetorical triangle, right? It's logos, pathos, ethos. Win people's minds, the logos, get the emotion. Why is this something you want to do? And then the ethos, have the credibility and the authenticity, right? That people go, yeah, I trust that this guy's going to do that. But yeah, it was a great lesson. It's been a bulwark. I mean, if you looked at the WWE story, how were we able to take a business that had been around for 30 years and transform it? Because we did so much work at the front end to say, what is really the opportunity? And we got lucky where we said, holy shit, we found something nobody actually else understands. And if we, if we go after this, if we're right, this is going to be huge, which was. But the work is what gave, to me anyway, it's the work that gives me the confidence. I'm terrible. You will know if I'm bullshitting you. Right? I'm a terrible bullshitter, right? People say, oh, you're a great storyteller. I go, I'm good if I really believe it. That's why I don't play cards. I don't gamble, because you can read me. You can read me. So.
Yeah. And I just finished former president of Tesla, John McNeil, his book. And he said the same thing. Like, he would dive into the manufacturing process, like every little piece of it, alongside Elon Musk, to understand it. Because once they understood it, then they could start making changes. I remember coming up, like I was, people would always talk about thinking outside the box. And what I learned was, like, unless you understand the box,
without a doubt,
yeah, like you can't. You really can't.
You cannot. Look, 3 quick stories on that. I get to WWE. I need to learn the business. Now, this didn't end up being part of the strategic transformation, but it's, part of the job is also running the business. And I go and I said, the way the thing worked, not to bore you, is you do 3 or 4 shows a day, 3 small shows, and then the 4th one would be the one everybody would see on TV. And that was a vestige of when it was primarily a touring business, not a media business, right? That's what Michelle and I did. So it was a vestige, but I wanted to see how it worked. So I fly down to Alabama, hit 3 of the shows, the small ones in Monroe, Louisiana, Jackson, Mississippi. I forgot which town in Alabama. And then the big event, the one that everybody then will see, is in Nashville. Vince finds out about that, and rings me up. He's like, hey, I heard you went on The Loop. That's what they called it. I'm like, yeah, I went on The Loop. He goes, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never had a senior executive do The Loop. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, everybody goes to the big event, to Monday Night Raw or SmackDown, right? The catering, the pomp and circumstances, all the business partners are there. He goes, but the Jackson, Mississippi, and he goes, nobody does that. He goes, well, he's a curious guy. He's an intellectually curious guy. So he wanted to know why. And I said what you just said. I said, there is no way I can help do anything if I don't understand every detail of how this thing works. That's the way that I can be helpful. Michelle and I, we're investors and board members in an equestrian business that we just invested in and are joined the board of, and we're working with the CEO, and he's like, wow, you guys are like going really deep. And it's like, yeah, because we want to, usually board members, you get the board materials once a quarter. We're like, yeah, no, we can't help that way. I mean, we can sound smart in the board meeting that way and pontificate to you. But if we really want to help, the more we understand, then we can say, hey, look, we've tried this. And, we think this is a good idea, but if you do that, here's some of the shit we're going to run into. So you got to plan for that. So in any event, but it comes back to what you said from the book you read on Tesla's president is you really, really, really got to understand it, understand the details.
Yeah. And there's another line you have in there, and I'll probably mess it up, but you're like, if it's like a 5-minute presentation, you better be prepared to give an hour long. And I've seen a lot of senior leaders or executives, they're only talking points deep.
Oh, yeah. I've got so many people who despise me at a time. I remember one guy saying to me, "You've asked me to look at this thing in 100 different ways. Why do you need?" He goes, "Can't we just pick the right one?" And I go, "Yeah, but I don't know what the right one is. So I need to look at it 100 different ways." I learned that. I saw it. I was at HBO, Time Warner. I'd gotten hired by Time Warner. I was the HBO. This guy, Eric, in charge of the group. So he's, part of his job is to go, to the CEO or to corporate and say, "Hey, this is a strategy. This is what we're doing." He was on he led the strategy team at HBO. And so he'd do the work. And so he'd have the 50 slide presentation, right? And then he'd have this binder of 300 pages, right? So every slide had 6 slides of, this is what we're saying we should do in this particular case, or this is how we looked at it. But here are the 6 different other ways we looked at it that led us to choose what you're seeing on that page. And back then I was the one going like, what the fuck are we doing all this stuff for? And then he shows me, and look, and I've been lucky. People have been very kind by sharing, not, how to do the things. That's valuable. More important is the why to do it. And he explained it to me because everything is choices, intentions. Everything is a probability. I remember him saying this. There is no certainty. So you have to do as much work to ascertain as best you can. There's no perfection. As much work. That's how you make good decisions. So, man, I stole that. Good artists borrow, great artists steal, which means you make it your own. I made that shit my own. I'm like, I'm taking that book and I'm going to be creating my own books from here on out.
And I think what's interesting is you look back in your life, like you were talking about, I think you were living with some friends and you talked about the historical baseball abstract, like sitting the coffee table book sitting there, and like you're like reading it, and you mentioned something about like you started learning because you were fascinated with something. And I think a lot of people, like the positions you and Michelle were in, like they want those positions.
Everybody wants those jobs. Everybody doesn't want to do what you need to do to get
right. And so I think that was like, it was like you figured out it early on what fascinated you. And that's the stuff that like sustained you and allowed you to do what you do and what you did for the WWE. And so it's just something that like I was thinking about when I was reading this, because I feel like, again, a lot of people, they like the noun, they just don't like the verb. And, and then they find themselves flailing in those positions when there was maybe something else they were fascinated about that they didn't have to do with their ego, but they didn't follow that path.
Yeah, you got to find, people talk about finding your passion. I'm like, look, I'm passionate about playing sports, or, was when I was younger, still play a little bit. But I wasn't any good at it, right? If I decided that I wanted to try to be a professional athlete, it was going to be the most painful, grueling, miserable existence because I just wasn't ever going to be that good at it. So I would say it's not finding your passion. That's good. It's finding things that you're good at, because you have to have some level of competence in it that you want to keep working at the craft. So I lucked out. I like tackling problems, right? Intellectual problems, right? And then I like, getting everybody else to see the opportunity, right? So the selling of it, if you will. So business was a natural place for me to kind of end up. And so I was lucky. So when I'm doing those 300 pages, and I know it seems like a cliche, never felt like work to me. It wasn't something I was trying to avoid. I got a buddy of mine who plays guitar, right? And he practices a lot, right? And he practices and he's not doing the 6 hours of practicing isn't work. He's doing it because he loves it. And then he's going to play, he learned a song and play it. And to me, it was the same thing. I was like, I wasn't trying to avoid it. Didn't want it necessarily to end. I liked it. So you got to find that. And that book, The Baseball Abstract, for anyone who hasn't heard of it, it was the precursor to Moneyball. Bill James was the father of that concept that became one of my favorite movies, by the way, with Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill. You got to watch it. Whether you like baseball or not, it's just a great movie. But in that book was the lesson that I took. Not only was it super interesting, because he was looking at the game of baseball through a new prism. But it was the first time where the aha went off. And it's like, all these experts out there, a lot of them don't know shit. They're just repeating what they've been taught. This guy came and turned around the entire way to think about something that's totally different, that all the experts that have been doing this for 50 years basically had gotten wrong. And so, man, that you talk about, and what I've learned is I've relearned that lesson over and over and over again. Experts are awesome to understand the way things are. It's the last person you want to talk to if you're trying to make something better. Because people, I mean, there are temperaments that aren't like this, but people get so calcified in the way they see things. And if they haven't thought about the system, if they've just learned their piece of it, they really aren't the people you need to talk to say, how do I make this thing better? And so that's the lesson I learned in that book. By the way, I was going to school then, living off campus with some of those buddies that married the girls who I'm still friends with. I'm going to see, we're going to the Black Crowes Whiskey Myers concert, all 8 of us,
awesome.
next week. So I'll see them. But they would watch me and they're like, I'm getting my MBA at this point. I'm no longer a fuck up. But they're like, he's a chemical engineering, he's going for chem. He's like, you spend all your time reading that book and writing notes on that book. You're not looking at any of the textbooks. I'm like, yeah, I got that ace. And I remember telling him, like, this is a lesson. This is a lesson. So anyway, one of my favorite books.
I'd like to introduce you to our newest partner, Roger Bank, a modern digital military bank built by military members for military members. Whether you're stationed stateside or overseas, Roger is designed to meet the unique needs of our men and women in uniform. I recently opened an account myself, and the process was incredibly smooth. It took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. Now, here's why I'm excited to partner with Roger. They offer high-yield checking and savings accounts, 0 account fees, early payday, and automatic savings with Roundup Match. Their military-ready direct deposit form is even auto-populated and signed by the CEO, saving you time and hassle. Plus, you get free global ATM access, real person customer support, and they even offer accounts for service members as young as 17. Funds are FDIC insured through Citizens Bank of Edmond, so you can bank with confidence and peace of mind. Visit roger.bank to learn more. That's ROGER.bank. I want to even you're talking about experts, that's the other piece of this is you didn't come up in sports entertainment. You came up in a bunch of different companies. And so, you mentioned David Epstein's book Range in here too, and the importance of being able to cross-pollinate and learn things. Like I'm finding now that one great thing in being in the military is we have a new job every 2 years. The longest I was ever in a single job was 24 months, and I was dying because that just felt like eternity to me. But now as a writer and doing all this other stuff, I'm taking those same lessons there and applying it to that. So how important was that aspect of your career too?
Yeah, it's one of those things, one of my favorite quotes, when you're going through life, it's like you're doing this and doing that and making this decision, and who knows why you're making it, or you're making it for the wrong reason. But then you're done, and you're not done, but you look back and you go, holy shit, I just wrote this amazing, finely crafted novel. And I would love to tell you that it was a plan that I said, I'm going to start in entertainment, then do industrial, then go work for a startup, fabless semiconductor. Then do a roll-up of alternative energy businesses, then go to the New York Times. And then finally, all of that is going to culminate with going and working in the wrestling company. I didn't. It so happened. Now, what I will say, and you hit on it, and it gets to David Epstein's book, Range, is it was marvelous training because it really forces systems thinking on you, because that's how you're able to adapt as you move. You begin to see the natural similarities of businesses. I always say the questions being asked are almost all the same in all these businesses. They're almost all the same, even though the product or services look completely different. So it was a great lesson because it really hardened systems thinking in my head, how to think about the whole, not just the parts, and how they interact. So I wish I could tell you I planned it, Love that I did it. There's negatives to it, right? One of the things that I don't have, right, is when you're in one industry all the time, you've got way more kind of buddies you've grown up with, right? Because you've all been. I had to like I had to keep getting the new network, but ultimately it was a great trade.
Well, one of the things, like there's a favorite quote I love. It's like, if nobody sees your vision, then it's a hallucination. And when you and Michelle were like putting all this work in and realizing that WWE was leaving a lot on the table, which by the way, I actually reached out to Michelle hoping that she would jump into this interview and surprise you. But like you, she's very busy. But I thought
that would have been hysterical. Oh, that would have been good. Oh
yeah,
my God.
I tried, George.
Right.
But you talk about something called the emotional journey of creating anything great. And I'd like for you to share that within the story of what you and Michelle did, because like that took a lot of guts.
Yeah. So the emotional journey of doing anything great is basically, and if you think of a U, and the bottom of the U is called the swamp of despair. The top end of one side of the U is you're saying, man, this is awesome. This idea that I've got is awesome. And then it's, oh shit, this is a little bit harder than I thought. Oh my God, what are we doing? And then you're in the swamp where you're like, that's it. I'm dead. I'm not coming out. I've destroyed myself. And then you claw your way out, and which is hard. And that's where, they talk about humor, the gallows humor, the conviction, the emotional support. You talk about Michelle, there was a ton of that. And you get out. And the issue is, once you get out, the first reaction is, oh, okay, hey, we got out. That's great. Let's stop. But you keep going. You say, no, we still haven't gotten to the North Star. And you keep going. And if you complete that journey, what happens is you look back and you go, my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever done. And so great that, I'm so happy you did it. So our journey was that, because, one of my favorite early books was Jim Collins, Good to Great. And he talks about the economic denominator, that every business has an economic denominator. And a lot of times people don't understand it. It's the revenue or the profit per what? It's the what. Our big unlock was that really what we were in was the revenue or profit per live time spent with us by a human being. That was the unlock. Because then we had a thesis when we looked at the industry, all the type of thing, again, the spade work in over a year, consumer surveys in multiple countries, deconstructing the value chain of the media and entertainment industry. Where is money flowing? Where do we think it's going to flow? If you're an IP rights holder, is it scripted, unscripted, live, sport, all that stuff we're doing. We said, hold on a second. We have a thesis of where this is going. We think things are live synchronous viewing, right? Synchronous viewing live is going to be where the value accrues, because there's going to be a proliferation of content, which is what happened, fragmentation, which is what happened. And so, but that synchronous, the ability to bring people together, and you have this tribal fandom. So I told people, so it dawned on me, it's like, the reason sports is valuable is not that it's a sport. It's not that there's a ball involved or a stick. The reason it's valuable is it brings people together, and people will watch at the same time. So either they're at the event or watching video of it. It's multi-generational. People are deeply fanatical about this. They become part of a tribe or a community. That's what it is. And then the thing was, and this, and now everybody takes it for granted, wrestling is that. Wrestling is that. We spent 7 years telling that story. The logic of it, the emotion of it, and we had the credibility behind, we know what we're doing. We've been successful. Michelle and I successfully, but it took 7 years. And during that time, we were criticized by our business partners. The people inside, were like, no, the rest, people who worked there were like, wrestling is wrestling. It's not a sport. That's what everybody was saying. It's not worth the same. It's not the same value. And we said, no, you're wrong. This is why you're wrong. There's the logic of it. The board, investors, you name it, the media. One guy wrote, the board should take George and Michelle to the top of the office building and throw them off. Right when we were in that swamp, right? We had launched the network. We were building this social and digital behemoth. And it was succeeding. Little by little, we could see it succeed, but the economics weren't coming yet. And as you know, in sports or live, it's the media rights that really drive the engine. And those are in 5-year cycles. So we had to wait for those cycles to come up. But along the way, nobody cared. Yeah. So it was just insult after insult and laughing at you. The great part, the same guy who wrote that they should throw us off the board, 2 years later, when we won, he said, this is the greatest transformation in the public markets have seen. So, but that swamp of despair, man, is painful. It is painful. It is emotionally grueling. You know, people care about 3 things: their health, their reputation, and money. And so when 2 out of the 3 are like up in the air, you know, your reputation's getting dragged through the mud. Financially, you're like, shit, you know, this is not going to work. I am going to get, you know, fired, but, you know, for different reasons than I eventually got fired. Later on, I will get to that part of the story, I'm sure. But in any event, yeah, it was quite a journey. We were riding in a car. This was now after we had won. It was 18. You know, everybody agreed. My God, WWE is one of the great franchises in the world. And Michelle and I, riding in a car. I always say either Dubai, Mumbai, or Shanghai, because we were always in one of those. And she turned to me and she goes, I know we had a plan, but did you ever think it was going to be this good? And I went and I pulled out, you know, we were talking about before, I pulled out the 300-page deck, not the 40 or 50 we shared with the board, but the 300 pages that we had built, where it laid it all out, like in detail, the blueprint. Now, there were changes along the way, but 80-90% of what we said, this is what we got to do. This is the sequence we have to do it in. It's going to take time. It's a 5 to 7 year journey, but here's the payoff. Everything. Both of us got choked up. We stopped. I put the iPad down. We both got choked up. Just started crying. Kind of like, all right, I'm not going to look. But yeah, it was amazing. But yeah, we spent a lot of time in the swamp.
Yeah, I wonder. Like, this is something I do. I don't know if you do anything like this. It's probably weird. But like, I'll be in moments like if you were to show a picture to you, like when you guys were in the swamp of despair, of you and Michelle riding in a car in Dubai or Mumbai or whatever, and you guys are celebrating this huge victory. WWE's in Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's blowing up there. Like, you guys have somehow managed to co-opt the pirators, the people that were pirating content in China, right, and turning that into revenue. And so, like, if somebody would have showed you guys a picture, you'd been like, well, how do we get through the swamp of despair to that moment? Like, I work with Ryan Holiday now. We're working on a book together.
Oh, great.
And there's like a moment where like we were sitting by the pool in Stanford, like kind of just throwing ideas back and forth. And I was like, man, like if you would have showed a picture to me of that like several years ago, I'd have been like, how did I get from like point A to point Z? Like, it just blows my mind. But it's those like moments. Again, it's the photograph moments.
Yeah.
And it's so amazing.
And by the way, I love Ryan's work too. I've read a couple of his books, so I found it inspirational. So tell him you spoke to a fan today. I wouldn't have been able to. There were 2 things. There was the logic of it, and then the emotional support of it. So the logic of it was those 300 pages, and probably it was thousands of pages. We had done so much work on the thesis and why it was right. And then as we were moving forward, we weren't like saying, all right, we're done. We kept looking, what's happening in the world? Is our thesis playing out, not just with us, but with other things we're seeing? Yep. Yeah, it is. No, this one's not. All right, maybe we have to tweak a little bit. We could see how we were building momentum. Our social digital audience we got up to 1 billion social media followers, right? We could see the amount of engagement, the amount of consumption. We launched that direct-to-consumer service. We could see, before we got to the 2 million subscribers, which took us a couple of years, but we could see during the journey, yeah, they're coming in, they're engaging, they're going deep. These are our most passionate fans. We were right about that. Without that having done the work, I wouldn't have been able to get through that. That was what gave me the reason, the plan, right? The plan is nothing, but planning is everything. It was that. That was on the logic. On the emotional side, look, you don't get it. My wife heard the pitch 100 times, right? I would be saying, I know this is right. And I'd explain it to her and she'd ask, well, why, And then we'd be on vacation in the pool and we'd be talking about that. And then Michelle, right? I had somebody else who, there's a handful of people I've, professionally that I've been around that I respect as much as Michelle. And so to have someone else who you respect that much saying, yeah, I see it too. And I'm like, so without that emotional support, my wife and Michelle, I'm not sure I'd go through, but it was both. It was the logic and having the emotional support to get through that.
And like, as a boss, like, cause you're now a president or you were co-president and now you're the co-CEO of ISOS Group. Did I say it right? ISOS, way off. But now that you're in those roles, like during this period too, you also had the encouragement of Vince McMahon. How important is that when you're the boss, or you're hearing it coming from the boss?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, Vince was the largest shareholder of the company. I mean, when I started, he owned the majority of the shares. By the time I left, just because we had so many more investors, he had about a third. So in any event, regardless, yeah, he was an incredible voice. One of the best compliments I ever got from Vince, and it gets related to the whole last 6 months, which culminates with him firing Michelle and I. Before that, when we had gone in there to say, hey, look, Vince, we're going to go because we're going to go do something else. This has been an awesome ride. And as he's trying to convince us to stay, I mean, he said, he goes, and this is a guy whose work ethic is second to none. He built an amazing franchise. So I have an amazing amount of respect for him. But he goes, George, for 30 years, I've been pulling people along. He goes, for the last 10, you guys have been pulling me along. He goes, don't leave me. And I say that because that's what we felt going through the journey. Look, there were a lot of disagreements. So it's not that everything is all rosy and you have different points of view, but along the way, and it's hard, right? Because we all have egos. And when you've been as successful as he is, you have a right to have a giant ego. And I never really saw that. He supported us, even when he did. Where his idea might have been different. He trusted us, and said so. And it was a big part of it. And one of the things in my movie, those 12 years that I got to spend with him and Michelle, and a lot of time we spent together. That part of it, not just the technical things that came out of it, but the actual, the rummaging around, the needling each other. Those are great memories for me.
I'll ask a few more questions. One, because we have a hard stop, and then two, I just had this thing pop up on my computer that's like, go plug it in now. You have 11% left. So my stress level right now, George, is way
great. I always keep a battery next to my laptop. So
I'm learning now. Okay.
There you go.
So a couple of questions I have, and I want to get to the firing piece of it.
Yeah.
Obviously from your dad reading and in the book, you talk about you reference several books. How important was reading to you in your development, as a co-president, as a person, as a husband, as a father throughout your life?
Most important thing. Most important thing to me is reading is a gift. I again think I'm lucky, reading always came easy for me. So it was easy to build a habit. As things that don't come easy for you, it's harder to build a habit. It's a source of new ideas. I'm a big believer. You talked about range. Some people sometimes say, why the fuck are you reading a physics book? And I'm like, I'm not sure. But there's something in there, first of all, if you read it, you realize, holy shit, this thing we call our experience is a lot weirder than we actually really think about. So you learn from that. But in any event, it just, the cross-pollination of thoughts and ideas, it's been invaluable. I mean, so if you said a hobby, that's probably the one hobby I do have, which is reading. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, if it's not something you love doing it, force yourself, do it 5 minutes a day for a year, right? Set that as the goal. Don't set reading, a book a week or a month. Forget that. Set 3 minutes, but just read every day for a year. And 3 minutes, you'll build up, that muscle, and it's the gift that keeps on giving. So yeah, I mean, I get, it's when I see some of these charts, these data charts of, people reading less, I'm like, I always feel like this pang of sadness, because I'm like, my God, people, what people are missing out on by reading. So yeah. And I would advocate, do what everybody do it. Read different things, don't just read one thing. Read different things, even if you don't understand 100% of it. It opens the mind. It just opens the mind.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a voracious reader. I have all these like notebooks.
That's awesome.
I've got quotes from your book in
thank
there
you.
too. Do you write stuff down in notebooks that you read as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. What I've done is I've evolved from just, first, obviously, before digital, it was physical. I morphed pretty hard or pivoted to digital. One of my favorite apps, like I will never not pay for this app. They could triple the price as Readwise, right? So I read, I take digital notes, it stores them, it resurfaces them, right? So every day I get 10 things I've highlighted in a bunch of different books. And to this, you do that and you go, holy shit. So that's my primary approach. And then what I'll do there's probably, 10 books that to me are like canonical sources of knowledge that I will go to. And then you'll see those, they'll have the handwritten stuff, right? And things where I'll sketch out my own version of what they're, the topic.
What last two questions.
Yeah.
What are a few books that have just kind of stayed with you throughout your career? You've given as gifts, or, they like come to mind when you think of who you are right now?
Yeah. Look, one of the ones that it was given to me, first job, part of the strategy team at Time Warner. Somebody recommended it, which was The Pyramid Principle by Barbara Minto. And it's basically a book around using inductive and deductive reasoning. So that sounds like, holy shit, who wants to read that? I'm telling you, if your job is to problem solve, it's the best book I've ever read. Second one that I, passionate about, and again, is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I've read both the kind of the original translation as well as the more, English or more modern translation. Both of them are great. I recommend those all the time. Make Your Bed, which is about that, is a small book. I gave those to my daughters. I don't know if they've read them, but one of the ones I love, it's I can't remember the author's name, but it's
Craven.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Love that book. And so there's a few others. In fact, I'm working on my second book, and part of that is going to be talking about, I think I'm up to about 15 that I just think, hey, these are my canonical. This is what I go back to all the time to think about problems. So, what I'm doing now.
That's awesome. Well, if you need any help with it, George, I'm here.
Love that.
The last question, and this kind of gets to the end, and I'm curious, right? When Vince fired you and Michelle, obviously you came back and
yep,
you ironed it out. And there's a great quote from one of my past guests, Chris Hadfield, who says, "There's not a problem so bad you can't make it worse." And you kind of mentioned that in the book too.
That's great.
Yeah. That was the thing I told my son last night, where he kept digging himself into a hole, and more and more things were stacking up. But like, I think like
that basically describes the last 6 months that we were at WWE, that comment.
Yeah. So you guys had made the decision to leave. Do you think it was like Vince's ego, or like just the fact that you guys were like family to him, that like it was almost like a defensive mechanism?
No, I don't think it was that. And I would never describe it as family. I would say we were high performing teammates, the three of us, right? Okay. We weren't socializing. That wasn't us. That wasn't our, we were high performing team. We were Parrish, McHale, and Bird, right? And nobody's going to say which one is which, but like three Hall of Famers, high performing teammates. No, I think what happened, Joe, look, Michelle and I we're ready to go do our own thing. In fact, and even at that point, even though we decided to afterwards to continue working together and start our own firm, we were actually going to go separate ways. Both of us were like, look, this co-CEO thing has been great. I want to just go do it. I want unitary command. So we went to Vince and, say, hey, look, this has been awesome. Great ride. But the problem, to use your analogy, the problem is we have other aspirations to do. So that's the problem. He, is like, hey, but like I said, he was like, you guys can't leave. This is amazing. There's still so much more to do. What do you even, what do you need? What problem is there? I remember him saying, George, when have I not done exactly what you wanted to do? I mean, you're running the company. What else do you want? I was like, yeah, but I want my only one name on the. So we made it worse because we walked out of that office. And if Michelle was here, she'd go, I told you. And she said, you know what? We should just stick to what we were going to do. Look, but she knows me. He had captured my emotion. I was like, Michelle, there is more to do here. We know that. There's a way for us to figure it out where all three of us get what we want. Well, the reality is that process that went on for like 3 months, where we tried to find a way, is what really hardened everybody's heart. It became, then the egos came up and then it became like, well, fuck this, that started happening. Now, all of a sudden, you'd say something that you might not have said before in a meeting, right? Because you're aggravated about it. So it got toxic for those last few months. And then eventually, he said, hey, look, this is toxic. We're ending it. And so, he told me, I remember the day it happened. We had a board meeting. It was a terrible meeting. I wasn't myself. I wasn't the person you're seeing here. I was sitting there kind of going through the motions. Came out and said, hey, you got a minute? Sure. This ain't working. And I was like, okay, I agree. Because I was done too. And I was like, I agree, but we've got an earnings call. Let's get through that. And then we'll announce it, blah, 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 blah. And it'll be, he's like, no, we're doing it right now. I was like, oh, that's not a good idea. That's not good. That's not good. And I think he would say, if you asked him now, he'd say, yeah, it wasn't a good idea to do that. But anyway, that's what did it. But and I remember telling everybody after it happened, that's what happened. They were like, yeah, that's not what happened. And I'm like, it is. But, as I recount in the book, year and a half later, whatever that was, 2 years later, he calls me up and says, hey, we're going to do, a big thing here. Not sure it's us buying someone, us being bought, merging, whatever, not sure, but it's big. And I need the A team and I need you guys back. So it was a great movie with like a meh ending, but we got to rewrite the ending in that case, which was awesome. Talking about egos, I'd be lying if I didn't say walking back into that building, kind of like, saying, yeah, the A team is back, felt really, really good.
That's awesome. Well, George, thank you so much for sharing your movie with us, with the book, and sharing your story with me in this interview. It was awesome, man. It was great meeting you.
Joe.
I feel like I know you in like 300 pages, and I'm looking forward to seeing where the next chapter of your movie takes you.
Yeah, and I'd love to come back on. This hour flew by. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Same, and we did it in the battery life, so I'm so excited.
Awesome.
All right, George, have a great one, man.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you again for listening to another episode of From the Green Notebook podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us gain visibility and the opportunity to help more people on their leadership journey. Also, make sure you check out our website at www.fromthegreennotebook.com. There, you can listen to past episodes, read leadership articles written by military leaders from around the world. You can sign up for our monthly reading list email where you can learn about new books that are coming out, and our Sunday reflection email that comes out every Sunday morning. Is really short. It's a 2-minute read, but I guarantee you it's going to start your week off on the right foot. Finally, make sure you follow us on Twitter at FTGN Notebook, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching for From the Green Notebook. Again, thank you so much for coming on this journey with us. I am humbled by the opportunity to learn these lessons alongside you. So please join us next week for another episode of From the Green Notebook, where we're going to help you lead with the best version of yourself.
I came from the mud. There's